Thanks a lot for the introduction and for the invitation to speak at this workshop. My talk is going to have a pretty different flavor than many of the other talks at this workshop. It's going to be more about tools and infrastructure and less about algorithms and specific science problems, but hopefully will be fun and interesting and relevant. Just quick introduction for those of you who don't know me. I'm a physical oceanographer and professor at Columbia University. I study ocean transport using satellite data and numerical models. I'm also very involved in open source software, developer on Xarray, co-founder of this Pangeo project, and in general, open source and open science advocate. So I'm going to do a little bit of open science and open source advocacy for you here today. So let me just begin with my take-home messages. If you want to tune out the rest of my talk, here's what I really want to convey. Data is at the center of artificial intelligence and machine learning. So let's really value data production, data curation, and data infrastructure as a core part of our discipline. And I'm going to talk about some approaches we've taken to this within Pangeo. And then the other message is, please don't build a highly specialized data platform for your project. Instead, please work with us in Pangeo and leverage modular open source components and cloud style computing, because I believe that's what our science users really want. And if you would like to read about this stuff rather than listen to a talk about it, here are 2 papers we wrote. Okay, so let's set the scene. So I'm an oceanographer. This is the ocean currents as observed from space. And this is a great video made by NASA JPL that shows the evolution of our observing system for the sea surface height. And it's the fact that as instruments improve, we get higher and higher resolution, finer and finer resolution of ocean features. And then finally, we come to the SWOT mission, which is launching this year, which will provide us an unprecedented detailed look into ocean dynamics. It's very exciting. But going along with this improvement and increase in the volume of data that we have to work with. And so NASA is now measuring the size of its Earth science data archives in hundreds of petabytes. And I'm sure ECMWF faces similar problems. On the modeling front, here's a simulation of ocean dynamics run at 1 kilometer mesh. And this is a global simulation that was run for 1 year. And just doing the basic math for how much data that produces, turns out the raw ocean simulation data set at this spatial and temporal frequency can produce 40 petabytes of data. From a scientific perspective, this is a fantastic opportunity. This is just beautiful simulation data that contains so many interesting science questions in it. But the data volume and the complexity of this data set is a huge obstacle to doing science with it. So what do people want to do with all of these massive volumes of data? Well, let's not just forget the value of basic first order statistical analysis. So when we work with sea surface height, one of the most important things we're interested in is the global mean, getting to global mean sea level. And that's easy when you have small data, but it's not necessarily even trivial when you have those petabytes of data to work with. We're interested in looking at patterns of spatiotemporal variability. This is a long-standing need in earth and environmental sciences, and this is just a major focus of research and analysis, and it always will be. But we're here today because we all want to do machine learning and leverage all these great new algorithms to improve our models and our understanding of the Earth system. What all these 3 different types of applications have in common is you really need the whole data set, right? If you want to train a machine learning algorithm, you need a lot of data. You don't just want a little subset. And that is a challenge to a lot of our computing infrastructure. It's well known that in the field of data science, the amount of time that scientists spend is on actual building models and algorithms is just a small fraction of the total work effort. Most of the time is spent cleaning, organizing data, collecting data. And nevertheless, we focus at a high level so much on the algorithms and not as much on that data on that data work. This was highlighted in a recent paper from some folks from Google Research with the provocative title, "Everyone wants to do the model work, not the data work." This paper argues that we really need to incentivize data excellence as a first-class citizen of AI. When I look at the program for this workshop, I see tons of interesting work on models and algorithms. But I think we need to always remember that none of those models and algorithms can be effective or successful without good quality data and appropriate data infrastructure to make use of the data. Okay, so if you're like me, you were taught to do science using the download model, where you have a server, there's some data files on it, you download them, clean and organize them on your laptop. And that works just fine. As you know, when I was in graduate school, our data sizes are measured in megabytes, still works just fine on gigabytes. As we start to get into the terabyte scale, it's very painful to work this way. And it's never going to work for us at the petabyte scale. No one can put a petabyte of data on their laptop. So I think the field overall is accepted this idea that we need some kind of data proximate computing. We need to bring our computing to the data. It's easy to say, but how? How should that work? Well, one answer is to use a so-called platform. This word means different things to different people, but to just give a really concrete example, Google Earth Engine is an example of a platform that's been really impactful in the remote sensing area as a tool to allow scientists to do data proximate computing, scale out analytics. And I listed Descartes as another example of a platform. These tools are really great, but there are some challenges with using those platforms. First of all, scientists really often want to do things that are not supported by the platform, go under the hood, do algorithms, data access methodologies that are not compatible with what the platform supports. And then there's the question of, what if you want to access data that isn't included in the platform? The data catalog in general is determined by the provider, not the user. There's also sort of some structural concerns about these platforms that if, these are single instance tools that can't really be installed elsewhere. They're not generally open source. And so there's this kind of instability associated with using those sort of platforms. And then finally, there's a question of how you pay for these services. Do resource limitations constrain the science we want to do? I'd like to advocate for a sort of third path here, which is what we call open cloud style infrastructure. And I put cloud here in quotes because I'm not talking necessarily about using, Amazon's cloud or Microsoft's cloud, but just generally the idea of working on a generic computing platform that has storage and compute available on demand. So when we're working in this context, it's really easy to do data proximate computing today using open source tools. For example, I think most scientists today are used to, who do machine learning, are used to working in a Jupyter notebook using an interactive scientific computing language such as Python, Julia, or R. And within these languages, we have these great machine learning frameworks like the ones that we all use, daily. And so right now, what's on the screen is sort of the experience that's available in a tool like Google Colab, which is a very popular platform for machine learning. When we bring in some parallel computing using a distributed computing tool like Ray, Dask, or Spark, we really have the chance to scale out our analysis. So, do distributed hyperparameter tuning or training models on very, very large data sets that require distributed computing, or just scaling out our analytics. That's very powerful. Now, when we're in the cloud, we're probably using object storage of some kind. And so we need to have analysis ready data using cloud optimized formats. And here I'm listing some of these popular sort of cloud optimized formats. And so, everything on this screen right now is open source, freely available, and can be deployed in any type of computing infrastructure, whether it's just on a single machine in a commercial cloud or in a high performance computing center. So this is the real sort of vision of what sort of architecture I think we need to deal with this petabyte scale data sets that we encounter regularly in high resolution modeling, remote sensing, and machine learning. So it's a pretty long introduction, which brings me to this, finally to what I'm here to talk about, which is what is Pangeo. So Pangeo is an open science community that's obsessed with efficient data processing. Pangeo is a sort of grassroots group of scientists and software developers, came together about 5 years ago and have been meeting regularly, weekly, ever since, iterating on developing tools, software infrastructure that's aimed at solving the bottlenecks that we have in our science at scale. This software is mostly in the scientific Python domain. We work very closely with the Jupyter folks. We work on the X-Array library, and I'll say more about what this software is later in the talk. But in general, it's very generic tools for large-scale analysis, visualization, and which includes, machine learning. And then finally, Pangeo deploys sort of experimental data and computing infrastructure. So we have recipes for how to run these tools on HPC systems. We maintain open public cloud-based Jupyter hubs, and we have petabytes of analysis-ready cloud-optimized data stored in various places on the internet, generally all open and publicly available. Pangeo involves a lot of different agencies and collaborators from different agencies. Most of our funding comes from NSF and NASA. We're very pleased to have ECMWF as a collaborator on some parts of the project, and many others who aren't on here. But the point here is this is really a community effort, and everyone listening is invited to join that community and participate. And what this community does is a really just sort of iterative approach to software and infrastructure development, starting always from scientific users and their use cases, identifying what are the real bottlenecks in day-to-day scientific workflows, and then working with open source software libraries to improve the overall open source scientific Python ecosystem, make it integrate better, make these tools live up to their full potential, and just repeatedly do this day by day, year by year. It really does have an impact, and we've seen major improvements to the state of our tools over these past years, I think, thanks to this effort. And then finally, we deploy this stuff in the cloud and on HPC systems where users can really get the most out of what these tools offer. So just a little bit of a technical dive into what Pangeo software does. We really like to think of the Pangeo stack as layers of different software that can help us with different elements of our computing and data analysis needs. So sort of at the bottom of that, we have efficient data formats like ZAR that are optimized for storing large multi-dimensional arrays of data in object storage, and also regular file systems. HPC systems work fine. We're heavy users of the Dask parallel computing framework, which is a really great way to allow scientists to scale out their code to distributed processing. So you can really get up to that many terabyte or petabyte scale. And this includes tools like Dask ML that can help us with distributed machine learning training. Then at the sort of high level of the stack, we have a tool called X-Array, which is a high-level API for analysis of multi-dimensional labeled arrays. You can think of it as a sort of in-memory version of NetCDF dataset. And sort of then sitting on top of that are many sort of domain-specific packages that can leverage all of those lower layers of this software stack that do specific things like, spectral analysis, or climate model skill analysis, or spatial filtering, things like that don't have to reinvent all of these layers of infrastructure, but can just focus on one specific thing. So what does this Pangeo infrastructure look like? Well, generally we separate into the sort of data lakes, analysis-ready cloud-optimized data stored in high-performance, publicly available storage systems, and then compute services, focusing mostly on interactive computing. So tools like Pangeo. In Pangeo, we run our own binder deployment that allows anyone to sort of reproduce, code from a GitHub repository. Jupyter Hubs, DAS Gateway, which is a tool that allows us to manage these distributed computing clusters. And this model is sort of highly extensible, franchisable, so that anyone that is facing similar sort of data challenges can deploy their own infrastructure in this style and have it interoperate with the rest of the internet, essentially. Keep saying this word, analysis ready, cloud optimized data. So coming back to those early slides, having good, clean data to work with in our science is a huge boost, not just for ML and AI, but all types of science. We spend so much time cleaning and preparing data for analysis. So we are really trying to normalize the sharing of these so-called analysis ready, cloud optimized, or ARCO data sets. It takes time and skill to produce a good ARCO data set. When we're sharing these types of data sets in the cloud, and we use one of these new sort of cloud optimized formats, we can get really, really fast performance with very generic computing architecture. So the sort of the center panel here shows how fast we can process data using some of these different formats. And when we're using ZAR data on Google Cloud Storage, we can chew through data easily at 10 gigabytes per second or more using pretty modest computing resources. And that's super important for when we're working with data at scale. So that's an important part of the message. So another important message I want to convey is that scientists really like working with Pangeo tools. That is because the creators and developers of Pangeo are all scientists who use these tools themselves every day. So what we have done with Pangeo is not necessarily build anything new, but just take existing software like Xarray, Dask, ZAR, machine learning libraries, and integrate them together. And I think this is an important part of the story in terms of sustainability of these tools, right? If the Pangeo project disappeared tomorrow, all of these tools would still be out there, they would still be usable, they would still be maintained by a sort of broader scientific community. Another thing I think scientists like about working with Pangeo is that we really advocate just giving direct access to data in its raw, analysis-ready, cloud-optimized format. You'll find various data portals out there, APIs, things like that. And for the most part, scientists just want direct access to data for sake of training their models or doing whatever they want to do with it. At the same time, the same software stack is pretty effective for building higher level apps, dashboards, things like that. And as an example of that, here's a sort of rundown of some agencies that are using Pangeo technologies now in their platforms. So the US National Weather Service has sort of implemented a OGC API for accessing their weather forecast data using Pangeo tools. The Canadian Environment and Climate Change Canada is providing climate services and data using these Pangeo tools in OGC APIs. The Microsoft Planetary Computer, a new style of data platform, is built heavily on Pangeo technologies, and has them deployed in the Microsoft Azure cloud. And then on the European side, the ESA X-Cube project is a sort of Earth observation data cube effort that is based heavily on Pangeo and Pangeo tools. Shifting gears to machine learning, I'm a PI on two new US projects that I think have a lot of potential intersection with the Maelstrom effort. One is M-squared lines, multi-scale machine learning and coupled Earth system models. The lead PI for this is Lorzana. And we are really trying to leverage high resolution simulations and satellite data sets to improve subgrid scale parameterization in climate models, focusing on sort of the air-sea interface and upper ocean and lower atmosphere. Another one is LEAP, Learning the Earth with Artificial Intelligence and Physics. This is a new NSF-funded center center that's led by Pierre Gentin here at Columbia, and with a similar data transfer gens to make those climate projections more data-driven. So how is Pangeo supporting these efforts? Well, Pangeo provides software for data processing, exploration, and visualization. As anyone who is an ML practitioner knows, you can't jump straight into training general adversarial neural networks if you have not already gotten to know your data very well through interactive data analysis and visualization, right? So we really think that that's a prerequisite to moving on to more advanced techniques, and Pangeo tools support that very important aspect of our workflow. Another way that Pangeo is supporting these machine learning efforts is by essentially building out these ARCO data lakes for holding training data sets, right? A big part of the work in all of this is really developing good training data sets for development of AI-based algorithms. And then finally, Pangeo is providing sort of infrastructure for collaborative data proximate analytics and model development and training. So, the way we often conveniently use Google Colab as a place to collaborate on and share workflows and data, machine learning models. We're trying to provide that same type of service using open source, community supported tools and infrastructure recipes. And so similar elements could potentially be useful for the Maelstrom effort here. I want to make a very clear disclaimer about what Pangeo does and does not do. So Pangeo today is all about offline data analysis. A data set has been produced. We want to analyze it, train a model on it. It does not address the needs of online machine learning and direct integration with ESM. So you can't, Pangeo is not actually about running simulations and models. It's about working with data offline, and that is a major limitation. However, a big part of what our workflows today look like are with offline training of models. But I'm really excited to hear the next talk from NVIDIA and the other talks at this session that address this really important question of online machine learning. And I'm interested to think about how Pangeo can start to integrate better with those approaches. Okay, so to wrap things up and summarize, AI and ML just don't work without good data. Exploratory analysis and visualization are really prerequisites for more advanced methods. So we need to support this type of workflow and recognize it as a core part of the AI ML revolution. Pangeo provides some open source building blocks for data intensive science. So I encourage you to use these however makes sense for Maelstrom. Maybe some aspects of this infrastructure are useful. Some of these software tools are useful for your project. I think some of them are already being used for data processing and analysis. And we're very eager to collaborate with you and just continue that iteration cycle to make these tools more useful for the community. What I'd like to see is a sort of federation of interoperable data and computing services built on top of sort of generic cloud infrastructure, such that have a bunch of folk platforms for each different project in the space, but a generic layer of infrastructure that we can all use in a familiar way. And so that's a challenge, but I think it's needed in terms of coordination. There's a lot of these big, ambitious AI, ML, and weather and climate projects going today in Europe and the US. And I really think we need to be working together on our infrastructure rather than building out sort of different separate data silos. And how that's probably more of a political problem than a technical one, but I'm very eager to engage on collaboration in that area. So here's some links where you can learn more about Pangeo. We try to be a very welcoming community. And I guess I'll leave my conclusions up for the Q&A. So that's it. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you, Ryan. That was a great talk and Pangeo is a very important project, so thank you for your hard work contributing to open science. Just a sort of note, Maelstrom, the data sets are already built on Xarray in terms of interacting with them via the Climate Lab package. So we're already using your work, but I'm sure we could do more. And so if you had, my first sort of not a question is, do you have any tips for users of the sort of do's and don'ts that to do it right?
There's a lot of tips, but I don't know that I could enumerate them right now on the spot in this type of context. But I would just say that's why our forums exist. The community in general is very welcoming. And if you have specific questions, this discourse forum is a great place to ask them.
Wonderful. Thank you. I see we have a raised hand. So Mikhail Languth, would you like to open your mic and ask a question? Or has his hand been lowered? I think perhaps it is. In the meantime, Peter Dubin has just raised his hand, so his question is definitely for Ryan. Go ahead, Peter.
Yes, thanks a lot. Yeah, Ryan, I mean, your Pangeo is great, and we, as Matthew mentioned, we're kind of using Pangeo tools in principle, and I think it's actually working quite well as well in the interplay between Maelstrom and Pangeo, because Pangeo is kind of more on the Xarray kind of ZAR type structure that we are using. Then we are building tools like ClickLab, basically arranging our data sets around this, and then also the Mantic data set, Mantic workflow tools are then also kind of even higher level, basically to make sure that the workflow as such exists. So I think it's kind of fitting well together to some extent. So I'm not too concerned here, and we're well aware of what you said, and what you said about specifically about data sets is very important, and we're kind of trying to publish our data sets exactly for this reason as well. The thing that we could do more about is basically your last point, I think, as a community, not necessarily only with Maelstrom and Pangeo or Leap or the other projects, but kind of rather as a community, we could try to kind of centralize more about where you get what data set and these kind of things. And I just wanted to know whether you have a tip how to do this in principle, how to basically get the community together. I mean, the pandemic hasn't helped really for the communication in particular over the ocean. But what's the best approach to do this?
I think we don't necessarily need in-person meetings. I think the best approach to this is through something that's actually quite boring and tedious to work on, but very important, which is the idea of standards, and particularly standards around data catalogs, right? And so what we've observed in Pangeo, it's very easy to write software to do something. Like if you say, oh, we need to make it so that scientists can easily access our data, let's write a package that will like download the data for the scientists or something like that. That's actually relatively easy. What's harder is to define a catalog specification to expose your data on the internet, describe what's in it, and allow anyone, search engines to crawl it, user tools to explore it, and interact with it in a generic way. The most promising effort here is something called Spatial Temporal Asset Catalog that really came out of the remote sensing community as a solution to how to share remote sensing data in the cloud, right? And I think we need to take this type of approach to cataloging machine learning training data sets. I think we need to define some basic standards of how to catalog these data, and then have tools that can interoperate with that catalog. The challenge is it's really hard to develop standards and specifications. It's much more fun to just write code. And so I drum up
Oh dear, we seem to be losing Ryan for now. We'll give it a second to see if he reappears, or otherwise, if not, we can move on to our next speaker. And hopefully Ryan will be back for our extended discussion section in half an hour, where we can get the end of that sentence.
Ryan, are you back?
I am back. Yes, I think I had a temporary internet glitch. But yeah, we'll talk more about this in the Q&A. I think it's time to move on.
Thank you, Ryan. Wonderful. We'll now